Thank you for joining me today as we go through the thinking skills sample paper for the selective high school test. There are going to be altogether 40 questions that we'll be going through one by one with full work solutions and hopefully sharing an insight into the most effective way of approaching these questions. So I hope you guys enjoy the explanations and find them beneficial. So we'll start with question 1 over here. Kai, Joe, and Alice have 30 marbles each. They take in turns to roll a dice. If the number rolled is even, then the player has to give the number of marbles shown on the face of the die to each of the other two players. If the number rolled is odd, then that player receives the number of marbles shown on the face of the dice from each of the other two players. So if it's odd, they receive, and if they're even, they have to give away the marbles. And they tell us that Kai rolls a 5 and Joe rolls a 2. And the friends end up with 41, 20, and 29 marbles respectively. Which number does Alice roll? Okay, so first of all, the best way to approach this sort of problem-solving question would be to draw a table to visually represent the information. So what I'm going to do is draw 3 columns for Kai, Joe, and Alice. And we're going to see how the number of marbles they have changes with each roll of the dice. So we know that they all start off with 30 marbles each. So 30, 30, and 30. Next, we know that Kai rolls a 5, which means it's an odd number. So therefore, the player receives 5 marbles from the other two players. So since Kai rolls a 5, he's going to receive 5 from the other two. So what we can do first is minus 5 from Jake, and so it becomes 25, minus 5 from Alice, and she will have 25, which means that Kai must receive 10 in total. So he goes from 30 to 40. Next, we know that Joe rolls a 2. So since 2 is an even number, Joe must give 2 marbles to each of the other 2. Okay, so that means Kai will receive 2, so to become 42. Okay, so Alice also receives an extra 2 to become 27, and Joe must therefore lose 4 marbles to become 21. So if we now compare these numbers to the marbles they end up receiving, it now is 42, 21, 27, and in the end they had 41, 20, and 29. So if we look at the differences for Kai, Joe, and Alice, Kai loses 1, Joe loses 1, and Alice gains 2. So for that to occur, Alice must have rolled an odd number as she's received marbles. And since she's received 2, 1 from Kai and 1 from Joe, she must have rolled the number 1. And that was why our answer for question 1 is A. Okay, moving on to question 2. So question 2, let's just read through it. Tom told Ada that he was thinking of giving up his hobby of drawing to focus on becoming an engineer. Ada said, "You don't need to give up a hobby like drawing just because you want to work in engineering. It's good for you to have hobbies. They help keep you happy and relaxed so that you can also study harder." And the question's asking you, which of these statements, if true, most strengthens Ada's argument? So this is an example of an assessing the impact of additional evidence question. So I'll just write that down here. Assessing the impact of additional evidence. And for these types of questions, what we find to be the most effective way of approaching it is, firstly, you need to establish what the argument is. So establish the main arguments. And after you have established the main argument, only then can you consider which statements would strengthen or weaken the argument. So in this case, since we are looking for statements that strengthen Ada's arguments, we would want to look at the options that support said arguments. Okay, so in this case, if we were to summarize Ada's argument, it is basically she's saying you should continue to keep your hobbies, right? It says it's good for you to have your hobbies as they keep you relaxed so that you can study harder. And in this case, the hobby is the hobby of drawing. So Ada's argument is simply keep your hobby of drawing as it keeps you happy and relaxed, and therefore you can study harder. So now when we go through the options, I would advocate for an elimination approach. So that would be step 3. And essentially what you want to do is eliminate the options that weaken Ada's argument, leaving yourself with the statements that strengthen Ada's argument. And then afterwards you can pick which option most strengthens Ada's argument. So elimination approach, where you remove weakening statements. So an example of a weakening statement would be something that says, something like keeping up your hobby, takes up a lot of extra time and in the end makes you less happy and therefore less productive. All right, so if we look through our options, A says artistic or creative skills are seen as important skills for engineers to have. Right, keep in mind that Tom is focused on becoming an engineer, and he wants to keep his hobby of drawing, which is an artistic or creative skill. So A is something that would strengthen or support Ada's argument. So we'll leave it right there. Now let's look on to B. It's just to make sure there are no better options. B says Tom's latest school report says that he wasn't studying hard enough, right? Which means that his hobby of drawing has resulted in him not studying hard enough. This is going against Ada's argument. Ada's saying you should keep your hobby of drawing, whereas B is suggesting that the hobby of drawing is resulting in worse studies. So B is something I would cross out because it is weakening Ada's argument. Looking at option C, Tom's school encourages its students to have at least one hobby. Again, this is something that would strengthen the argument because it's advocating for a hobby, but it is quite general because Tom's school is just saying you need to have at least one hobby. It's not specifying whether it is drawing or not. So again, we'll leave that for now. And looking at option D, learning to draw well often takes hard work and concentration. Now, if option D was true, then that means the hobby of drawing would take a lot of Tom's energy, and therefore it would make sense that he wouldn't be able to focus as much of his time on being an engineer. So D is something that would again weaken Ada's argument, and I would remove that. So essentially, we are trying to make a decision between A and C, but it's a lot easier now that we have eliminated the statements that weaken the arguments. So now between A and C, which one would most strengthen Ada's argument? You want to choose something that specifically relates to the question. C, it says just one hobby. It doesn't specify exactly what hobby it is. It's too much of a general statement. So in that case, I believe that A is a better option as it most strengthens Ada's argument, and that is the answer for question 2. Okay, so just moving on. Question 3. Whoever stole the money must have had both an opportunity and a motive. If this is true, which of these sentences must also be true? Now, this question is an example of, again, critical thinking. It's a critical thinking question that is testing the ability to make logical conclusions. And so for these questions, generally, if it is possible, it's good to kind of visualize the information in a diagram. So it says whoever stole the money needs to have both an opportunity and a motive. So to steal money requires opportunity plus motive. So both are required for you to, for someone who stole the money, they needed to have both of these, opportunity and motive. So now let's have a look at our options. Again, we'll start off with the elimination approach and eliminate the incorrect choices. So A says, if Finn had both an opportunity and a motive, he must have stolen the money. As a general tip, when you have such absolute words, that let's say, for example, must and definitely and always, these very absolute words, they generally are not going to result in the answer, as there's always going to be an exception to these rules, right? So Finn may have had an opportunity and a motive, but he may not have stolen the money, right? Because as you can see, this line goes in one, this arrow goes in one direction only. It's not the fact that having an opportunity and motive automatically means you steal money. This return arrow is not true, right? It is not a two-way street. It's only a one-way street where stealing money requires you to have an opportunity and motive and not the other way around. So A is too much of an absolute statement, and I would say it's something that we can eliminate, right? It's made an assumption that just because you have an opportunity and motive, he must have stolen the money. Now, if we look at option B, if Finn did not steal the money, he cannot have an opportunity. Again, you can find a flaw in this conclusion, because if Finn didn't steal the money, it might have also been because he didn't have a motive, right? Finn did not steal the money because he didn't have a motive. It's not necessarily because he could not have had an opportunity. And the same applies for C. If Finn did not steal the money, he cannot have had a motive. So let's just say, for example, Finn didn't steal the money. He may have had a motive in this case, but just didn't have the opportunity, right? And so again, both B and C have made this assumption, and we can eliminate them. In option D, if Finn did not have a motive, he could not have stolen the money. And that is a true statement, because we know that stealing the money requires both an opportunity and a motive. So if Finn doesn't have a motive, he can't have stolen the money, because you need to have both to have stolen the money. So therefore, D is the best answer in this case. Moving on, let's go on to question 4. So question 4 is an example of problem-solving question. And in particular, it is about identifying So moving on to question 4. Question 4 is an example of a problem-solving question again. And in this case, let's have a read through it. A digital display consists of 7 segments which light up in different combinations to produce digits. For example, to display the digit 1, the two right-hand segments light up as shown here. The display is used to show in sequence each of the digits 0 to 9. However, the display is faulty and two of the segments are not working. Two of the digits in the sequence are displayed as follows. So, what is the next number in the sequence as shown by the faulty display? So the key bits of information when approaching this question is knowing that there are two faulty segments, right? And then we need to figure out what these first two numbers are. Number, let's call them A and call them B. So focusing on the A picture first, you need to consider what possible numbers this could be. And in fact, the ones that come to mind are 2, as it looks like this, as well as 6. So let's focus on 2 first. If 2 is indeed the number that's being represented by A, that means the faulty panels must be this one here, as well as this one here. As if both those are not working, then the 2 will end up looking like what diagram A looks like. Now let's just see if this is applicable to the next number. Let's assume that these two panels are the faulty ones, because they will be the same faulty panels. And as you can see, the number that would be here if the panels were working would be 3, as you can see here. And right, 2 and 3 are two numbers in a sequence, right? And so the next number that should be shown is 4. And what does 4 look like? Well, 4 should look like this. Now, if the right-hand panels were not working, then 4 would end up looking like this, wouldn't it? If both those two disappeared. It would end up just looking like an L, which corresponds with our answer A. Now, if you had gone down the 6 routes, you would have realized that it wouldn't have been possible to make one of the options in the end. So A is the final answer, with the sequence being 2, 3, then 4. All right, next we have question 5. In question 5, let's have a read of it. At the end of each term, Mr. Chen gives scores in reading and writing to each student in his English class. These scores are then added together to give an overall score in English for the term. For example, a student with scores of 30 in reading and 40 in writing would have an overall score of 70 in English. Last term, Sarah and Miller got the same overall score in English. There are now two statements by Sarah and Miller, and if we read our question here, it says, if the information in the box is true, whose reasoning is correct? So this is an example of detecting reasoning errors question, which is part of the critical thinking style questions. And therefore, we must logically read through their statements and identify if they have any errors in their reasoning, essentially, if they have made any assumptions. So let's look at Sarah's one first. Sarah says, if our scores in writing were different from each other, then our scores in reading must have been different too. So just remember that the reading and writing are added up together to give you the final score in English. And we know that they got the same score, right? Both Sarah and Miller end up with the same score. Same and same. So if the scores were different for writing, in order to make sure they ended up with the same overall total score, then the scores in reading have to be different too. So Sarah's statement makes sense, right? So we'll give it a tick. Now let's look at Miller. Miller says if our scores in reading were the same, let's say for example 20 and 20, then our scores in writing must have been the same too. Because let's say for example they both got a total score of 70, and they both got the same score in reading, which was 20, that means their score in writing must have both been 50, which is the same as well. So just looking at this example, Miller's statement is also true. So therefore, our answer is going to be C. Both Sarah and Miller have correct reasoning. Okay, next question. Question 6. Let's just center it. So for question 6, let's have a read of it. The children Anita, Brian, Eric, Lee, and Zara are all in one family. And then they give you this information. Lee is 1 year younger than Eric. Brian and Eric are twins. Anita is 3 years older than Lee. Brian is 8 years old. Zara is older than Eric, but younger than Anita. So there's a lot of information. And the question is asking us, one of the following sentences is true, which is it? And it's about their ages. So what I would suggest for this is an example of a problem-solving question, which is, in particular, it's the one about relevant information. So it's testing us on our ability to take out the relevant information from the question and apply it to the question. Again, if you're able to draw a diagram to visualize the information, it's a lot easier to process. So I'm just going to use the starting letter of each person's name and start off with Lee. Lee is 1 year younger than Eric, but we know that Brian and Eric are twins, so they must be the same age. So Brian / Eric, I'm going to put them next to each other because they're the same age. The eldest is going to be here and the youngest is going to be here. Now we know that Lee is 1 year younger than Eric. So if we minus 1 year, then we're going to arrive at Lee's age. And then we find out that Anita is 3 years older than Lee, right? So if I just draw an arrow going upwards and add 3, we're going to arrive at Anita's age. Finally, we find out that Brian is 8 years old, right? So that means both Brian and Eric, since they are twins, they're also both 8 years old. Since Lee is 1 year younger, she must therefore be 7 years old. And since Anita is 3 years older than Lee, that means she will be 10 years old. And then lastly, they tell us that Zara is older than Eric, but younger than Anita. So Zara would be in between them two there. Now, if you look at our options, we just need to find which of the following statements is true. If you look at option D, it says Anita is 10, and we can see that we've correctly identified that Anita is 10, so therefore D must be the true answer. Moving on to question 7. Question 7 is again another example of a problem-solving question, and this time this is testing the ability to use a certain procedure to attain the answer, and this procedure may be things like algebra, using stuff like simultaneous equations to help you solve the question. So let's have a read of the question. It says, a farmer has 245 female goats. This year, all but 9 of them have had kids. None of them have had more than 2 kids. So that means the goats either have 1 kid, 0 kids, or 2 kids, but no numbers around, like no numbers above that. So they cannot have had 3 kids. And they tell us that in total, 357 kids have been born. And now they're asking us how many of the goats have had 1 kid only. So just working backwards from the first 2 statements, we know that there's 245 in total, but 9 of them have not had kids. So that means the remaining all had kids, right? So what's the remaining amounts between the difference between 245 and 9 is 236. And out of these 236 female goats, we know that some of them had 1 kid and some of them had 2 kids. And we need to figure out how many of them had 1 kid only. So using a bit of algebra, we can let the number of birds that had one kid be x. Okay, so let x be the number of goats with one kid. So that means the remaining amount of goats that had two kids must be 236 minus x is the number of goats with two kids. So now we need to then use the information together to figure out to solve the equation for x. So let's generate an equation for x. So if x is the number of goats that had one kid, that means the number of kids they will have in total would be x. And then if 236 minus 236 minus x, if we put that in brackets, that's the number of goats with two kids. Since they have two kids, we need to multiply the number by 2, don't we? And then we know that when they are added up together, in total there were 357 kids born, right? So now we have generated an equation with x that we can now solve. So just doing a bit of expansion, the 2 must be multiplied to the 236 as well as the negative x. So that gives us the number of 472 minus 2x is equal to 357. Just moving, I think, down here to continue our working out. So now we know 472 x minus 2x, well, a positive x will cancel out with one of the negative x's, leaving us with just a negative x is equal to 357. So now your job is to figure out what number will, when 442 minus that number equal to 357. So simply you need to find the difference between 472 and 357. And so if we just do this subtraction, carry the 1 over, so that becomes a 6. So 12 minus 7 is 5, 6 minus 5 is 1, 4 minus 3 is 1. So that means x was equal to 115. So remember that x is the number of goats with one kid, so therefore our answer is going to be A. So again, question 7 is an example of a using procedure type of question. And so I highly recommend learning a little bit of algebra to help you solve these types of questions. Okay, moving on to question 8. Let me just clear the board first. So in question 8, we have Sanjay says that wind farms will not meet all our energy needs as the demand for electricity grows because we cannot rely on a source that varies with the weather. We need power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is why the construction of wind turbines with their uneven output is not the solution. And which one of the following statements, if true, most strengthens Sanjay's argument? So again, this is another example of assessing the impact of additional evidence style of question. So the first step, as I mentioned before, is to figure out what Sanjay's argument actually is. And if we look at it, it says, it's quite obvious that this Sanjay does not believe in wind turbines. He does not think it's the solution, right? It says construction of wind turbines is not the solution. And the reason he gives for that is because it's going to be inconsistent because it will be too variable with the weather, right? So to summarize it, Sanjay's argument is against wind turbines because it is unreliable. And we need power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we need a reliable source of energy. So we need to look for statements that strengthen this. So statements that are also against wind turbines, that say wind turbines are basically bad. So let's have a look through our options and see which ones would strengthen the Sanjay's argument. So look at option A first. Scientists have found that global average wind speeds are increasing. Now, you might assume that with increasing wind speeds, there will be more energy generated from the wind turbine. So this is saying there is a chance for wind turbines to become more consistent. So this is actually pro wind turbines, which goes against Sanjay's argument. So I will cross that out since it actually weakens Sanjay's argument. B, there is no practical way to store the energy generated by wind turbines. Now, option B is definitely against wind turbines because it's saying there's a big flaw. You can't store the energy generated by it. So I would say it definitely does strengthen Sanjay's argument because it's also against wind turbines. So let's just keep that in the back of our head and just quickly look at C and D. It's very important to look at all the options to make sure you're choosing the best answer. So in option C, it says local residents often complain about wind turbines spoiling the landscape. So again, you can see that C is against wind turbines, but the reason it's against wind turbines is not because of the energy and how it's unreliable, it's because of the aesthetics of turbines and how they make the environment look bad, right? So although C does strengthen Sandy's arguments for the wrong reason, it's pro wind turbine. It's against wind turbines, but because of the aesthetic reason, not because of the unreliable reason. So for that, I would say it's a worse answer compared to B. And then if you lastly look at D, a single wind turbine can generate the same energy as 1,000 solar panels. Again, that seems to be quite favorable to wind turbines. So option D is supporting wind turbines, which is weakening Sanjay's argument since Sanjay is against it. So I'll cross that out. And between B and C, B is definitely the stronger answer and is more relevant to his argument that they're unreliable. So B is the better answer, whereas C is just talking about the aesthetics of it. Moving on to question 9. So question 9 says, in the Junior Golf Championship, prizes are given out to the players who finish first, second, and third, and to anyone who gets a hole in one. And again, there's a statement by Sam, and we have to find which of the following sentences shows the mistakes Sam has made. So this is an example of an identifying assumption question. And again, for this type of question, you simply need to read through the statement by Sam and see if they've made any, if there's any holes in their logic, if they've jumped to any conclusions. Okay, so we know so far prizes are given out to people who finish first, second, and third, as well as anyone who gets a hole in one. And now Sam says, well, I know that one player scored a hole in one this year. So only one player scored a hole in one. So that means 4 players will get prizes. So he has assumed that the people getting prizes, 4 players will get prizes. He's assumed that that would be the person who finished first will get a prize, the person who finished second will get a prize, and the person who finished third would also get a prize, as well as that one player who scored a hole in one, right? So hole in one. So that's how he arrives at 4 players receiving the prizes. But he has assumed that the person who scored a hole in one, why could it not have been one of these players who came third, second, or first? It's definitely possible for the player who came first to have scored the hole in one. And therefore, that means there's actually only 3 players who should get prizes, since the player who gets first and got the hole in one, in the end, they only receive 1 prize in the end for that. So we need to look for a statement that says he's assumed that none of the players who came first, second, third scored a hole in one. Right? And if you look at option B, it says that exactly. The hole in one might have been scored by a player who finished first, second, or third. And that is the assumption that Sam's made when he says that 4 players will get prizes. Right? Because if someone finished first, second, or third and they scored a hole in one, only three players would receive a prize. Moving on, question 10. Okay, so for question 10, this is an example of a non-verbal reasoning question, in particular, spatial reasoning. So for spatial reasoning questions, the best way to approach them is to draw as much diagrams as you can, as you need to be able to rotate these shapes, and it's very difficult to do it inside your head. So the more diagrams you can draw, the easier it will be to solve these types of questions. So question 10 says, shown below are 3 small pieces of a puzzle. Let's call them A, B, and C. Now, which one of the following big pieces can be combined with the 3 small pieces to make a square? So the way I would approach doing this type of question is to draw a square around each of these answer options. So it looks something like this. Like this. Whoops. Let's just make that a bit less thick. There we go. And then do that for the other answer options as well. And essentially what you want to do is you want to divide the white space around here to see if you can split up the square into those 3 pieces, A, B, and C. So let me direct your attention to option B. If you look over here at the right-hand side, you notice that there is a little indent with a square here, right? And that matches very perfectly with this indent here. So imagine rotating C around so that it will fit into this piece here. So if I draw the line here, you guys will be able to see that C actually, if rotated 90 degrees anti-clockwise, will fit perfectly there into this position. Right, next, if you look at the top edge of this square, and if you draw a line here, you can see that, again, there is this square that juts out, which perfectly matches this square that juts in here. And if you rotate B 180 degrees anti-clockwise, it will perfectly fit into the space here. And lastly, if you look at piece A here, if you rotate that one 90 degrees clockwise, you can see that it will fit perfectly into this position there. And so therefore B is our final answer. And so when you approach this question, you simply need to go through all the options A, B, C, and D and see if you can fit those shapes in by drawing in the lines. And if it's not possible, it's probably not the answer. And if as you move through it systematically, you'll realize that B is the one that will be able to fit those 3 pieces above. All right, let's just clear that and keep going. Okay, so question 11. To become a successful architect, you need to be creative and also have an excellent attention to detail. So it's saying the qualities of being a successful architect requires creativity as well as an excellent attention to detail. So we will say, if I was to represent this in another way, I'd say creativity plus attention to detail will increase or will are qualities that are needed to be a successful architect. All right, so it's required. So now let's read through Will and Evie's statements and then try and identify if there's any breaks in their logic or if they've made any assumptions. So for Will, he says Sally is creative. That's good. She loves drawing and painting and always checks her written work carefully. So Sally's both creative and she has attention to detail. She is sure to become a great architect. Now, remember what I said before about those absolute statements, stuff like must and definitely and always. This is an example of one of those absolute statements. She is sure to become a great architect. I feel Will has, in this case, made a huge assumption in saying that just because you're creative and you have attention to detail, you will definitely become a great architect. There are other qualities that make a great architect as well, and creativity and attention are just two of them, right? So you cannot just say for certain she's surely going to become a great architect. So Will, in this case, his reasoning is flawed a bit because he's made an assumption by saying that very absolute statement. Then Evie says James enjoys writing stories and has a vivid imagination, which means James is quite creative, but he struggles with detailed tasks, so he's not good at attention. He doesn't have a good attention to detail. Architecture is probably not for him. Now, Evie's statement logically makes sense because we know that you need to have attention to detail in order to be a good architect. So since James does not have good attention to detail, he probably can't be a good architect. So in this case, Evie's statement makes logical sense, and therefore our answer should be B. Okay, let's move on now to question 12. Question 12 is an example of relevant information again. So it's testing the ability to extract the relevant information from all the information they've given you to answer the question, right? So first thing I would do is actually read the question first. So I know exactly what I'm looking for from the information. So we're interested who lives in the last house on the right. Okay, so now let's read the question. 5 houses stand together in a row. One person lives in each house. Each person likes a different sport. They all use different forms of transport. So there's going to be a lot of information. And again, the key thing is to put it into a diagram. So that's exactly what we're going to do now. So I'm going to draw house 1. So house 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? And this is the right-hand side of the row. This is the left-hand side of the row. And we know that the owners, each house will have an owner who plays a certain sport and has a certain mode of transport. So essentially it's like a table. All right, and now let's fill in this table with information as we read through it. So the first bullet point says, Mr. Green likes tennis, lives next to Miss White, who is on the left hand of the row and drives a van. So we know Miss White lives on the left end of the row, so I'm going to write White here. And we also know Miss White drives a van. Just write van there. Now we know that Mr. Green lives next to Miss White. The only position next to house 1 is going to be house 2. So Mr. Green must live in house 2. And we know that he likes tennis. All right, so I'm just going to tick that bullet point because we've already covered and used that information. The second part says, Dr. Gray uses a taxi. Now, we can't really add that to the diagram right now because we don't know where Dr. Gray lives. But we just know that Dr. Gray uses a taxi. So just keep that in the back of our mind. The person who likes badminton lives in the middle of the row. So the middle of the row is house 3. So we know that The house 3 occupant likes badminton. Okay, that's cool. All right, so we can tick that one off. Bullet point 4, Miss Orange drives the car, doesn't like swimming. Again, we can't really apply it to our diagram right now, so we just hold that in the back of our head. Next statement, the person who likes swimming does not have a motorcycle. Again, not really applicable right now to the table, so we'll just keep that in the back of our head. The next one, Miss Black likes football. She lives next to Miss Orange and 2 houses from Dr. Gray. Now, this is a very important statement. It gives us a lot of information. So we know that Miss Black lives next to Miss Orange and 2 houses from Dr. Gray. Now, there's only 3 more houses that we haven't accounted for. It's house 3, house 4, and house 5. Right? So to live 2 houses from Dr. Gray, there's only 2 options. Either, just hypothetically, I'll use a different color. Dr. Gray has to live in house 5, and therefore Miss Black lives in house 3 to make sure she's 2 houses away, or it's the other way around, right? Dr. Gray lives in house 3, and then Miss Black lives in house 5. Now, going back to the information, remember that Miss Black likes football, and the person in house 3 likes badminton. A very important piece of information. So Miss Black, we know she likes football, and we know the person in house 3 likes badminton. So Miss Black cannot live in house 3. Therefore, Miss Black could only be in house 5. So we can confidently say that Miss Black lives in house 5. And now we can actually stop the question right here. We've used enough relevant information to answer our question, which was who lives in the house on the right of the row, which is Miss Black. So therefore the answer is C. All right. So moving on to the next question then. Question 13 says 12 students are studying mathematics. They take 3 tests, each marked out of 100. The results of the first 2 tests are shown below in the table. As a prize is awarded to the student with the highest combined total from the 3 tests. If 2 students are tied for the highest score, nobody gets the prize. As the scores currently stand, 1 student is able to be sure to win the prize as long as a high enough score is achieved in the final test. What is the minimum score that in the final test that will guarantee the student the prize? Again, this is an example of a relevant information question because they give you quite a lot of data, but you only really care about the top 2 students. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'll quickly scan through the marks in test 1 and test 2 for all the students and try and note the highest ones you notice, right? So first one I noticed is James. He got an 83 and an 86, so that's a total of 169. Okay, and if you look at Alira, that's 60 and 60, it's not going to be high enough. Connor is 70 and 50, again, not high enough. You can quickly go through all the rest of these and you realize they all don't really match up to 169. And the only one that comes closest is Layla. So circle James and now circle Layla. Layla has 81 and 79 to give a total of 160. And James has a total of 169. So these are our top 2 students, right? And those are the only students that we're concerned with right now. So we need to figure out the minimum score that James needs to get to ensure he wins the prize. And he can't tie with Layla, right? So let's consider the absolute worst case scenario. Layla gets 100% in the 3rd test, right? So she adds 100. And so now her total is 260, which means James needs to get a minimum score of total score of 261 to guarantee he has the prize. So simply I'm going to get 261 and take away 169 and see what score he needs to get for that third test. So you bring the 1 over, that becomes a 5, 2, and then 25 minus 16 is a 92. 25 minus 16 is a 9, and in total it's a 92. So that means he needs a minimum score of 92 in order to get 261 as a total, and therefore ensure he guarantees himself the prize. So our answer here is going to be A for 92. Okay, so moving on to question 14. This is again an example of the evaluating the impact of additional evidence. So reading through it, Anne's mother has written a letter to the school. She has suggested that for the children's safety, cars should be banned from the roads around the school at the beginning and end of the day, as there is a high risk of a child being involved in an accident. Right? As you can see, Anne's mother's argument is that we should ban cars from school at the beginning and end of day because there's a higher risk of the child being in a car accident. Right? So we need to choose a statement that also says, yes, we should ban cars because they are dangerous to children. So looking at option A, parents who go to work after taking children to school may be late if they have to walk with their children to school. This is saying we shouldn't ban cars. Option A is saying, hey, if we ban cars, all the parents who have to walk their kids to school will now be late for work. So this is anti-banning cars. So that would be going against Anne's arguments, Anne's mother's argument. So I would cross out A. B says, when people cannot find a place to park, they can get very bad-tempered. Now, this is just a bit of a general statement. So it's not really about, it's saying that when there's a lot of cars around and it's difficult to find a place to park, people can get a bit impatient. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a higher risk of a child being involved in an accident. So it's not going to be the best statement that strengthens Anne's mother's argument. And if you look at option C, it says exhaust fumes are invisible but very harmful to children. As you can see, C is saying the car exhaust fumes are quite dangerous to children. And Anne's mother's argument is saying we should ban cars from start and end of the school because there's a higher risk to the children. So C is quite relevant to what Anne's mother is arguing, that cars are quite dangerous and therefore we should ban them, and therefore C is the best answer here that supports her mother's argument. And D we can also rule out because it's just saying that cars are quite noisy, so not really saying that cars are very dangerous to children. Okay, so moving on to question 15. This is an example of identifying an assumption question. Let's have a look at it. Ferdinand has an atlas which he can use to look up any city in the world. Okay, so he has an atlas that he can use to find any city in the world. Now let's have a look at Ferdinand's statement. If you tell me the name of a city, you don't need to tell me what countries it's in. I can look it up in my atlas. So let's see which of the following options shows the assumption that Ferdinand has made here. So he's claiming that he can if you tell him the name of the city, he can find it for you. You don't need to tell him which country it is. But what if some of the cities, some city names occur in multiple countries? Let's say, for example, city called, let's say, for example, Sydney is not only just in Australia, but it's also in Sydney's also in Canada, for example, right? So now if I gave him the name of the city, Sydney, and now he sees that there's a city called Sydney in both Australia and in Canada, how is he going to figure out which one it is? He has made an assumption here that you don't need to tell him which country it is in. So if we look through the options, which one says something very similar to what I've just discussed? It is option B, which says there are some cities which have the same name as each other. And that's the assumption or the mistake that Ferdinand has made, right? Is because if the city has the same name, then it's in two different countries. He's not going to be able to figure out exactly which city you're referring to. And there is the mistake he's made. Question 16 is an example of a non-verbal reasoning question. So in this one, it says, I have used 4 identical tiles to make a pattern on the floor. There's a gray rectangle over the top of the tile so that only one part of the pattern is visible. Using the same orientation as the diagram above, what is the pattern that is covered by the gray rectangle? So if I was to just quickly just fill it in here. Now we know the key thing here is that they are identical. So looking at all of them here, we know that since the tiles are all identical, we know that they always have a triangle, right? So there's one triangle that looks like this. There is 2 squares, one there and one there, 2 squares. And then if we look at this one here, we also know there's also one quadrant, right, or 1/4 of a circle. So each of these tiles must contain one triangle, 2 squares, and a quarter of a circle or quadrant, right? So now you just simply fill in the blanks. So looking at this one over here, we know that the one that's missing is the quadrant of a circle. So I'm just going to draw that there right now. Looking at the square here, it's missing the triangle. So the triangle is going to be like this. Then looking at the square over here, we know it's also missing a triangle. So the triangle is going to be in the corner like so. And then lastly, we know that this last square here is missing the second square. So therefore, it must be a square here. And which of these options is the same as the one I've just drawn? It is option A. Okay, so moving on to question 17. Jun's school was selecting students for a new course in computer programming, as well as considering their existing knowledge of computer programming. The school sets them a maths test and a chess challenge. If a student had at least some existing knowledge of programming, then they only had to pass the maths test. So if I was to summarize that, it means experienced. If you're experienced and you pass the maths test, then they could be selected for the new course of computer programming. On the other hand, if they had none, right, if they have zero experience, no experience, then they either needed to get an excellent score on the maths test or do well in both the maths test and the chess challenge. So if you're not experienced, if you want to get into the program, you need to either get really top mark in the maths, or you can get in by doing well in maths test and challenge. So maths plus chess, and you need to do well in them. So let's look at the question. Jun is an experienced computer programmer, so Jun is in this category, but failed to get a place on the course. What must have been the reason? Well, we know that for experienced computer programmers, they simply need to pass the maths test to get on the course. So if Jun, who was an experienced programmer, failed to get a place, he must have failed the maths test or he did not pass. So that means option C has to be the correct answer. Next question. 18. Again, this is an example of identifying any reasoning errors. So let's have a look at the question. Question 18 says, monotremes are the only type of mammal that lays eggs. So only type. So I'll underline that. That's very important. So we know that monotremes are the only type of mammal that lays eggs. Let's read Jack's statement. So if you see a mammal laying an egg, you know it must be a monotreme. Well, since we know that the only type of mammal that lays eggs is a monotreme, Jack must be correct, right? You see a mammal laying an egg, it has to be a monotreme since the only type of mammal that does do that is the monotreme. So Jack's statement is true. Now let's read Amelia's statement. Amelia says, and if you see an animal laying an egg and you know it isn't a monotreme, then it can't be a mammal. So you know that there's an animal laying an egg, but it's not a monotreme. Well, we know that monotremes are the only type of mammal that lays eggs. So therefore, this animal can't be a mammal because it's laying an egg and you know it's not a monotreme. Therefore, it can't be a mammal since mammals, the only type of mammal that can lay an egg is a monotreme. So therefore, that logic also makes sense and Amelia is also correct. So therefore, the answer should be C. Both Jack and Amelia are correct. Moving on to question 19. Question 19 is an example of a problem-solving question, simply using procedures, finding the best procedure of doing it. So let's have a look. The prices for passes for a tourist bus are shown below. 1 day costs $5, 4 consecutive days cost $10, and 7 consecutive days cost $20. And you need a pass on the following days of the month. I won't read through that, but you can have a look. How much is the cheapest valid combination that I could use? So keyword is cheapest. So we want to choose the option that is the cheapest. So if you look at our 3 options, the one that's the cheapest is definitely this one here. The one for 7 consecutive days only costs $20, right? Whereas if you think about it, the pass for 1 day is $5, right? It's much more expensive per day to get the 1 day pass as opposed to the 7-day pass. So we want to aim to get as much of the 7-day pass as well as the 4-day pass and minimize the amounts we have of the 1-day pass since this is the most expensive, right? So this is the most expensive. This one's the middle. And this one's the cheapest. So where in these days of the month will we have 7 consecutive days? If you look from 10 to 16, right, that's all within 7 days. So we can get a $20 pass for those days, which leaves us with 2, 3, 4, 6. Now, unfortunately, 2, 3, 4, 6 spans over 5 days. So we can't exactly get the 4-day pass for all of it. So what we have to do instead is we can get a 4-day pass for 2, 3, 4, and that costs $10, right? And then we'll probably waste it on day 5, and then we have to get a single day pass for day 6. So this one would be costing us $5. So in total, the minimum we can spend is 10 plus 5 plus 20, which is $35, giving us the answer of B. Moving on to question 20. Question 20, again, is a question of evaluating the impact of additional evidence. So let's have a read through it. There are some countries in the world where a high birth rate is a major worry, especially when the country is less economically developed and resources to feed and care for children are scarce. But in other countries, the opposite is the case. The birth rate in several rich countries is falling at the same time as older people there are living longer. This will become a problem as time goes on because there will be far more old people who need looking after, but far fewer younger people to do that. By allowing birth rates to fall so much, these countries are storing up a problem for the future, right? So let's summarize what this argument is saying. This argument is saying we need to essentially have more babies, right? And essentially, it's saying that it's a huge problem to allow birth rates to fall so much, and these will be a problem in the future, right? So this argument is saying we need more children and younger population to take care of the older or the aging population. We need more children and young people to take care of the aging population. Right, so in that case, we need to find a statement that says, yes, we definitely do need more children and gives us some sort of reason why. Okay, so looking at our options, A says parents who have fewer children can devote more time and their energy to the children they do have. This is saying we should have less children, so it's actually weakening the argument, so we'll cross that out. B says older people have much greater health needs, especially when they are over 85. So B would support the above arguments because it's saying the Asian population has more health needs, which therefore means we need more young people to take care of them, right? So B supports the argument. Let's hold that for now and just look at C and D as well. C says older people do not always want to be dependent on their children and grandchildren. So C is actually weakening the above argument. As it's saying, old people don't want the help of the young people. So which would weaken the argument of saying we need more young children to take care of them, right? So we're left between B and D. D says young people should see care of their parents and grandparents as their duty. So between B and D, the better answer is B because it is more specific and relevant to the argument. As you can see, our argument is saying we need more children and young people to take care of the aging population. If you told me the aging population has greater health needs, that is strengthening the argument. So option D, between B and D, the reason B is the better answer is because it's much more relevant to the above arguments, right? Especially when talking about the health needs of the older people or the aging population. D is making some sort of a general statement that young people should see taking care of their parents as their duty, right? So therefore, B is the best answer here, as it is the one that actually strengthens the arguments rather than just making a general statement. Okay, moving on to question 21. In question 21, this is an example of a critical thinking question again, that's testing the ability to make logical conclusions, so drawing conclusions. And we have to figure out which one of the following is not a possible conclusion to be drawn. So it says, if Monty does not sleep well, he is likely to be tired. So not sleep well leads likely, keyword here is likely, to be tired. And if he's tired, he will not perform well at the interview. So interview, no good. So I just do a cross to say bad at interview, right? Tired, Monty, means a bad interview. And statement 3 says, if he performs well at the interview, he might be offered a job. Otherwise, he doesn't stand a chance. So if he doesn't do good at the interview, he's definitely not getting the job. No job. Okay. But if he does perform well at the interview, he might be offered the job. It's not guaranteed, but he might be. Okay. So let's read through the options. If the above statements are correct, which of the following is not possible? Option A says Monty did not sleep well but got the job. Let's see, is this possible? If Monty did not sleep well, he is likely to be tired, which means he would have done poorly in the interview and not gotten the job. But the key word here is likely, because if he didn't sleep well, there is also a chance that he won't be tired. And if he's not tired, he might perform well at the job and get offered the job. So it is possible for Monty to not sleep well, but still get the job. So I would say A is possible, therefore we can cross it out because we're only looking for a statement that's not possible. Looking at B, Monty slept well but did not get the job. That's definitely possible. As you know, if he sleeps well, he'll be performing well at the interview, but still he may be offered the job, right? So there's a chance he could do well at the interview, he could have slept well and still not get the job. So B is possible as well. C, Monty performed well at the interview but did not get offered the job. Again, it's very similar to B. If he performs well at the interview, he might be offered the job, right? So there's a chance he does not get offered. So C is possible as well. Which leaves us with D. Monty was tired at the interview, but still did well enough to get the job. Let's look at our line of reasoning, guys. If we know that Monty is tired at the interview, we know, looking over here, guys, if he's tired, we know that he will not do well in the interview. And if he's not going to do well in the interview, he's definitely not getting the job, right? So if Monty is tired at an interview, he cannot get the job. So D is not possible. And therefore is our answer. Moving on to question 22. This is an example of a spatial reasoning question. So, when viewed from above, an object looks like the picture shown below. The really important thing that I want you guys to notice is there's 3 layers to this picture. 1, 2, and 3. Right? So we should only expect 3, when looking above, 3 layers. If you look at option A, which of the following is a possible view from the side? Now, if A was the answer, you would expect 4 layers. Just have a look. Imagine your eyes here and you're looking down. You'd see this little bit there. You'd see the second layer there, the third layer there, and the fourth layer, right? And in our picture here, there's only 3 layers. So A is not possible. You look at option C, there's 1 layer here, second layer there, third layer here, and then fourth layer there. Again, option C, you would expect to see 4 layers. Option C, you would expect to see 4 layers. So again, can't be true. Option D, quite obviously, you can see 1 layer, 2 layer, 3 layer, and 4 layers. So D can't be correct. Leaves us with B. And if you look at B, there's 1 layer there, 2 layers there, and 3 layers there. So you would only be able to see 3 layers from above, and that is consistent with the picture here. So therefore B is the answer. Question 23. Question 23. Jara's music teacher has promised that any students who did not have a chance to perform in the spring concert will definitely be chosen to play in the autumn concert. So it's saying that anyone who didn't perform in the spring concert or didn't get a chance to will definitely get to play in the autumn concert. That's what this statement's saying. That's all we know can be true. That's all that we can assume to be true, right? So no spring concert means you'll definitely play in the autumn. And this is always true, right? Because it says definitely. This is an absolute statement, right? And that's all we can take to be true, guys. So remember, the thing in the box, or this box here as well, is the only thing we can assume to be true here. So now let's look at what Jared says. Well, I did perform in the spring concert, so that means I definitely won't be chosen for autumn. I'll have to find something else to do. Now, Jared's statement here is made an assumption here, because the only thing we know to be true is if you did not perform in the spring concert, you will be guaranteed to play in the autumn. Nowhere did it say that if you performed the spring concert, you can't be chosen for the autumn one, right? So which option says that? Look at option A, guys. Just because anyone who did not play in spring will play in autumn, it does not mean that anyone who played in spring will not play in autumn, right? It does not mean that anyone who played in spring will not play in autumn. So that is the assumption or the mistake that Jara has made. Question 23. All right, moving on to question 24. In a survey of television viewers, everyone who liked volleyball liked skiing. Everyone who liked skiing liked cycling. But no one who liked skiing liked gymnastics. And Darren, Amanda, Lee, and Jess all took part in the survey. Based on the following information, based on the above information, which one of the following must be true? So again, I like to just draw it out in a visual diagram. So we know that everyone who liked volleyball liked skiing. So volleyball also means you like skiing. And then if you like skiing, you like cycling. So skiing means you also like cycling. But no one who liked skiing liked gymnastics. That's basically saying everyone who liked skiing did not like gymnastics. Right? So if you like skiing, you also like cycling, but you don't like gymnastics. So now let's look through our options. The one that makes sense would be option D. Let's see if that's true. If Jess likes volleyball, right, then she must also like skiing. And if she likes skiing, she does not like gymnastics. So if Jess likes volleyball, she does not like gymnastics. That is a true statement. Next question, question 25. A band is performing at the local park. The first performance will be on Saturday, the 1st of August. The final performance will be on the 31st of August. There will be 2 performances on every Monday and every Tuesday. So Monday and Tuesdays are special because there will be 2 performances. No performances on 22nd and 23rd. So those are also special because there will be 0 performances on those days and 1 performance on each of the other days. So we know that Saturday was the 1st of August. And the question is asking us, how many performances will there be altogether? So the really important things is the special ones. So we want to figure out how many Mondays and Tuesdays are between the 1st and the 31st of August. So let's do that. Sunday is going to be the 2nd, and then Monday is going to be the 3rd, and then Tuesday is going to be the 4th. And then let's just keep on adding to see how many Mondays will fit. So the next Monday would be the 10th, followed by the 17th, followed by the 24th, followed by the 31st. Right, so we just add 7 each time to get to the next week's Monday. And do the same thing for Tuesday to figure out how many Tuesdays there will be. So there will be 4, then 11, then 18, then 25. And unfortunately, we can't put 32 because there's only 31 days in August. So in total, you can see how many special Mondays and Tuesdays do we have. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 in total. So if we are adding the total here, we know that there will be 9 special Mondays and Tuesdays where there will be 2 performances. So there will be 9 lots of 2 performances. Adding on, now the rest of the days will be 1 performance, except 22nd and 23rd, where there will be 0. So let's just work backwards. So there's 31 days in total in August, minus 9 of the special Mondays and Tuesdays. That leaves us with 22 other days. And now we have to minus the 2 days that there are no performances. So that leaves us with 20 normal days where they have 1 performance. So 20 lots of 1. So that's just going to be 18 plus 20, which is 38. So the answer is A. Next question, question 26. Question 26 says, why is it that Brazil has produced such successful soccer teams and so many brilliant players? One theory is that it is because Brazil has a lot of very poor areas, and so people are just desperate to leave the favelas or slums, and that becoming a professional soccer player is a good way to do this. But a better explanation is the unique popularity in Brazil of a game called futsal. Futsal is played with a smaller ball that is more difficult to control and in smaller spaces where people have to think faster and be more accurate with their passing. As former soccer superstar Ronaldinho said, when you come to play soccer, it's easy if you come from futsal. So basically, to summarize the above argument, they're saying if you come from futsal, it's a lot easier to play soccer, and that is the reason why Brazil has a lot of successful soccer teams. It's saying the reason why Brazil has successful soccer teams is because they play futsal there, not because there's a lot of poor areas or slums. Okay? So, which of the following would strengthen the above argument? If you look at option D, guys, it says there are many other countries that have areas as poor as Brazil that have not had the same success in soccer. So basically, D saying, you can have poor areas and that does not result in good soccer players, which supports the argument above, which was saying that no, it wasn't the slums in Brazil that produced good soccer players. It's because futsal is a popular sport there. And so D is the one that actually strengthens our above argument the best. Right. The reason it's better than the other options is because it's very relevant to the argument, where our argument was the reason Brazil has good soccer players is because of the futsal popularity rather than having many slums. And you can see in D, they have mentioned the slums have not contributed to good soccer players in other countries. Next one, question 27. Again, it is detecting reasoning errors. So again, what's in the box is the only thing we can assume to be true. Whenever the red light on the side of Yifan's computer is flashing on and off, it means that the processor is starting to overheat. So the only thing we can assume to be true is red light flashing means processor is overheating. Right, and they know that whenever that's occurred, the processor has overheated. Right, every time the red light flashes, the processor has been overheating. Yifan then says the red light isn't flashing at the moment, so the temperature of the processor must be fine. Again, notice an absolute statement is a big warning sign that it might not be true. And that is exactly the case for Yifan, because there could be a scenario where the red light is broken and the processor is overheating. And because the red light is broken, then it's not flashing, right? So Yifan has made an assumption here, and therefore I would say her line of reasoning is not perfect or not correct. Then if you look at Ria, it says, no, that's not right. The light is on continuously. That means the processor has already overheated. Again, Ria has made huge assumptions here. The only thing we know to be true is that every time the red light flashed, the processor was overheating. So we know nothing about what a light on continuously means. So what Ria says is completely an assumption here. So therefore, neither Yifan nor Ria had the correct statement. So as you can see, for these detecting reasoning error questions, you have to be very objective. And it can only take from what's inside this box to be true. You can only assume that is the true thing. Anything else that's not mentioned, you cannot assume to be true, right? So just having that sort of mindset will be very useful in approaching these questions. Next question, 28. Again, this is a non-spatial reasoning sort of question where you had to rotate the different options A, B, C, and D to see which one could fill wherever the ink has stained the carpet, right? So having a systematic approach again is important. For this one, you can see since it's a 2x3 tile here, or 2x3 piece of carpet here, there's 4 different scenarios where we can replace the ink carpet. It could be this rectangle, this 2x3 here, right, which I'll call A. It may be the rectangle on the right hand side of it, which I'll call B. It may be the vertical rectangle above it, which I'll call C. And lastly, it can also be the rectangle, 2x3 rectangle below it. 1 second. Let's just redraw that one over here. 2x3. And we'll call that D. Let me just make this a bit clearer. Right, so there's 4 different positions that we could replace the carpet in. So what you need to do is essentially start off with option A and then work your way into rotating it in these 4 different positions, A, B, C, D, to see if it would match up, to see if these symbols would match up to what you can see in the diagram there, right? So let's go to look at option D, which is the answer in this case, and I'll show you why it's correct. So option D, if you rotate this anti-clockwise by 90 degrees, so we're going to be rotating it this way by 90 degrees. So it's now going to look like this. Right, and so be very careful with how the symbols face. I generally would just look at where the gap in this symbol is, and if it's rotated 90 degrees anti-clockwise, if it's pointing up, now after rotating it 90 degrees clockwise, it should be pointing this way. So this symbol should look like this, and it's in that corner of the rectangle there. Now this symbol here, it was pointing towards the right. The gap in the symbol is pointing towards the right. Now if you rotate it 90 degrees clockwise, it will be moving upwards, so that it will be pointing upwards. So therefore the gap is going to be here. And then lastly, this one, the gap is originally pointing upwards. If you rotate it 90 degrees clockwise, it's going to be pointing towards the left. So it's going to look like this. Right? And you can see that this diagram here is going to fit in to position D. Right? It will match up perfectly in position D, which is the, if I remove the other ones, we'll be able to see it much more clearly. So that's what we're going to do. Right over here, as you can see, this would perfectly fit into position D. And that's why this D is our answer here. Okay, question 29. Again, this is a question about relevant information. And we're going to apply a similar strategy and try and translate the relevant information into a diagram to help us figure out the answer. So, first of all, we know that 5 children did a test with 5 difficult questions to answer. And you can see that we are ranking them according to their time as well as their accuracy. So I'm just going to draw a table with time here and accuracy here. So we know that Haley is faster than Gabriella, but I've got 3 questions wrong. What we're going to do is just focus on time at the moment, and then we can figure out the accuracy later. Okay, so Haley was faster than Gabriella, so we can write H here, and we know that Gabriella is slower, so this is the fastest, and this is slow. Adam got all questions right, but took the longest, so A for Adam, he's going to be right at the bottom. Natalie finished second, that's good, okay, but got 2 questions wrong. Gabriella got more questions right than Natalie, but finished after her. So Gabriella finished after Natalie. So Natalie must be in front of Gabriella, and we know she finished second. And we also know that Natalie was not as fast as Haley. So put these 2 statements together. Natalie finished second, but she was not as fast as Haley. So therefore, Haley must have been first, right? So Natalie is going to be second here, and she was not as fast as Haley, so Haley must be the fastest. So now that we've got the order of the times, let's quickly look at our statements to see if we can figure out which of the following can't be true. So the one that stands out is C. Haley was not first to finish. It's quite obvious that Haley was the first to finish, as we know that Natalie is second, and Natalie is not as fast as Haley. So Haley must be the first to finish. So therefore, C cannot be true. And as you can see, right, we did not need to figure out what their accuracy was. This is where you need to be selective with the information you get to arrive at the answer quickest. Right? In the case where we weren't able to arrive at the answer just by looking at the time, then yes, I would continue to look at the accuracy. But in an exam technique is really important, and so you want to choose the most effective but most accurate way of arriving at the answer. Okay, question 30. In question 30, it says, an advertisement for stain remover claimed, stain gone never fails to remove a stain. 4 stain items of clothing were washed, and 2 questions were asked in each case. Which 2 of the missing answers must be known in order to test the truth of the claim in the advertisement? So, we need to prove that stain gone never fails to remove a stain. So if you look at the first question, it says, was stain gone used in the wash? Yes. We definitely want to know what the answer A is here, right? We want to know that we pretty much want to know that the stain was removed, because that would help us prove that stain gone never fails to remove a stain. So A is definitely needed, okay? So just by looking at our answer options now, we can cross out B and we can cross out D, because we know A must be part of the option. Answer A must be known, right, in order to prove this statement. So now we need to figure out, is it B that we need or is it D that we need, right? So just have a look at both. In question 2, it says, was stain gone used in the wash? You have answer B, and then was the stain removed? Yes. And then if you look at item 4, was stain gone used in the wash? You get the missing answer D. And was the stain removed? And it's no this time, right? So the only difference is one says the stain was removed and one says the stain was not removed. So how do we decide between needing either the missing answer B or the missing answer D? So let's go back to what we need to prove. Stain gone never fails to remove a stain. So we would ideally need to prove if it's used, yes, used, and then yes, stain removed. Right? This is proving that stain gone actually works. Then we also need to know whether if the stain, no, stain was not removed, no stain removed, right? And we need to figure out whether stain gone is a factor for whether the stain was not removed. So therefore, it's more important that we need to basically figure out, yes, if stain gone's used, the stain becomes removed. That's proving that it's actually useful, right? It's proving that it works. Then we also, in order to make it balanced, we also need to prove that when stain gone is not used, that the stain is not removed, right? So that's why we need a result where the stain is removed, and we also need a result where the stain is not removed as well, in order to prove it actually never fails to remove a stain. So no use means no stain removed, and yes use means yes stain removed, right? So that's why in the end, we require D as well as A. So therefore, the answer should be C. Moving on to question 31. Alana wants to buy 4 books. There are 4 shops that sell the books that she wants. The prices of the books and any special offers are shown in the table below. Alana wants to buy all her books from the same shop and to spend as little as possible, so she wants to save money. Right? Which shop should she buy her books from? So essentially, it's a problem-solving question, and you need to use just some basic arithmetics to figure out which one will get you the best deal. Right, I'll just systematically work through this. So in shop A, if you buy 2, you get the third one for half price. So let's say we buy 2, that'll be 24 times by 2, which costs us 48. We get the third one for half the price. So if we get the third one for half the price, it's going to be for 12 bucks. That's going to cost us 60. And then we need to buy the last book for another 24. So it's going to cost 84 in the total. Right, for shop B, each book costs $20, but there's no special offer, right? So we buy 4 books, each costing $20. That will cost us 80 in total. Shop C means $26 per book. You buy 3 and you get the 4th one for free. So 26 times by 3, that will give us 78. And then we're going to get the last one for free. So that's just going to cost 78 in the end. And then for question 25, we buy 1 and we get the second one for half price. So buying 1 costs $25. The second one will then cost half the amount, so $12.50. So that's going to cost $37.50. That's 2 books only, right? So we need to get another 2. So that would be just times by 2 equaling $75. So therefore, in question 31, the best answer is D. Moving on to question 32. It is quite common to hear celebrities and politicians boasting about how little they sleep. They like to create the impression that their success and achievement comes from giving up their sleep to work exceptionally long hours. But the truth is that success and sleep go hand in hand. A group of Spanish psychologists have interviewed a wide range of successful people over the last 30 years and have found that most of them give credit to their achievements to plenty of rest and sleep. Far from being an obstacle to a great life, sleep in fact seems to underpin it. So this argument is obviously saying sleep is very good, right? If I were to make it a very simple argument, saying sleep is very good and leads to success because the people are more rested, right? So, which of the following would strengthen the above argument? We need to find a statement that is also supportive of sleep, says sleep is great, basically, okay? Or something that says if you don't get enough sleep, it will result in poorer results. So if you look at option D, it says getting less than 7 hours of sleep can reduce people's ability to make good decisions, right? So this statement is kind of saying that if you don't get enough sleep, you're gonna make worse decisions. So it's actually saying, it is supporting the argument that you should sleep more, right? And so therefore D is the best answer here. The other ones, options B and C, are quite irrelevant to the argument, whereas option A is contradicting our argument or weakening it. Moving on to question 33. So in question 33, again, it's one of those relevant information questions from problem solving. So let's read through it. We need to figure out which was the most popular game. Brooke and Joyce wanted to find out which was the most popular traditional game at their school. Wulijini, Birunjin, Kuchi, and Kintan. They did a survey of all the students at the school and found the following. Everyone who liked Wulinji also liked Kuchi. So if I were just to write it all out right now as initials, so W for Wulinjini, B for Birunjin, Ku for Kuchi, and Keen for Kintan. Okay, so we know that everyone who likes Wulinjini also liked Kuchi. So what I'll do is I'll just draw an arrow that says that everyone who likes Wulinji also likes Kuchi. Okay. Some people liked both Kuchi and Birunjin. Okay, so I'll just do a little arrow that says some people like both of these. Okay, so it goes both ways. No one likes both Birunjin and Wulijini. Okay, so we'll just keep that in the back of our head for now. And then bullet point 4 says there were more people who only liked Kuchi than people who only liked Birunjin. So Kuchi is a bit more popular. So I'm going to do a positive sign here, right? There are more only fans of Kuchi than only fans of Birunjin. And then lastly, it says all Kintan fans were also fans of Wuli Jini. So all Kintan fans were also fans of Wulinji. But if you have a look, we also know that the Wuli Jini fans also like Kuchi. In the end, as you can see from the arrows, a lot of the arrows end up pointing towards Kuchi, right? And this diagram kind of shows how Kuchi is the most popular game. Therefore, the answer is B. So as you can see, with the relevant information, it's all about being able to draw the information in a diagram that makes it much easier and clearer to see the answer, rather than as a line of 5 bullet points. Next, question 34. This is a type of using procedures problem-solving question. Having a read of it, 150 people were asked to name their favorite type of movie. The results as follows. No other types of movie were chosen. The information was entered into a computer in order to construct a pie chart. However, one of the movies was missed out. As a result, this was the pie chart that appeared on the screen. So we need to figure out which type of movie was missed out. Now, the key to doing this is by looking at the pie chart. If I was to divide it up further into essentially eighths, you can see that this big one here is 5/8 of the pie chart. Now, it is by far the biggest proportionally, right? And there's a high likelihood that it should be fantasy. So F for fantasy, right? As fantasy had the most popular amounts of people. Now we know that the fantasy people is 66, and we also know that that is 5/8 of the pie chart. So we can say that 66 people is equivalent to 5/8 of the pie chart. So just to make it a bit simpler, the calculation, I'm going to change the 66 to a 65. Okay, it's not going to change the question so much, but it's going to make our question a bit easier to do. So now we know that 1/8 of the pie chart is worth, if we divide 5 to both sides, 13, right? 65 divided by 5 is also 13 people. So 1/8 of the pie chart is worth 13 people. Therefore, the entire pie chart, or one whole pie chart, after multiplying by 8, will be worth around 104 people. So that means This entire pie chart is worth approximately 104, and originally there were 150 people. So if we take the difference of 150 and 104, that's approximately 46. Now let's look at our table here, and which category has approximately 46 people? Well, the closest one is comedy, right? So that means it was comedy that missed out, right? Because then we minus 42 people to get around 108 people, right? And that's what we calculated to be around, right? We calculated to be around 104 people with a minor adjustment in the calculation. So definitely it is B, comedy. That was the one that missed out. Question 35. So, question 35 again is a evaluating the impact of additional evidence question. What is the point in spending time and effort learning things when you can just look them up on the internet? Even doctors these days find themselves using Google when they want to try to decide what is wrong with a patient. Was it really necessary for them to have spent years studying science and medicine when the information can now be found online in an instant? As technology progresses and as more and more people have access to the internet, it surely becomes more and more of a waste of time gaining knowledge. Memorizing facts should become a thing of the past. And this is indeed the argument here. The argument is saying we should stop memorizing facts as we have access to the internet now, where there's an endless amount of information. Now, we are looking for a statement that weakens this, right? So something that says, even if you have the internet, it's not going to be helpful, right? You still need a specialist's opinion. So if you look at option C, it says, people need some existing knowledge in order to make sense of information they find online. Now, if that statement is true, that means it doesn't matter if you have the internet. If you don't have the knowledge, you're not going to be able to use the information you find from the internet, making the internet essentially useless, right? And so that would definitely weaken the argument that says the internet is great because you can get access to all this information. Well, it's not going to be that great if the information on the internet, you don't understand it, right? So that's why C is the one that most weakens the above arguments. Question 36 now, let's move on. This is an example of a problem-solving question. Again, let's read through it. I am hiding in one of 3 rooms. On the door of each room, I have written 2 statements, some true, some false. However, no more than one statement on each door is false. So in this case, the best way to approach it is, first of all, we have to just clarify what this means. No more than one statement on each door is false. That means there cannot be 2 false statements. So the only options you have are in front of each room, there can be 2 true statements. That's one scenario. Or it could be the top one is true, the bottom one is false. Or the third scenario where the top statement is false and the bottom statement is true. But you can never have 2 false statements, right? So now what we do is have a very systematic approach. I'm going to essentially apply each of these 3 scenarios to room 1 and see if it makes sense, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a table of 2 rows and 3 columns. And this is going to be table 1 where the first 2 statements are true. So this is room 1, room 2, room 3, right? And let's say in room 1, both statements outside were true. So that means my name is Aziz is true, and I am not in this room is true. Okay, so if both their statements is true, Aziz is the person and he's not in room 1. Okay, so if he's not in room 1, okay, so now we move to room 2. It says, I am not in this room, and it also says, I am in room 3. So, I am not in this room. That could be true. that could be false. We don't know enough information yet. So we can't say that for sure. But let's look at the second statement of room 2. It says, I am in room 3. Now, let's say this statement is true. If that statement is true, then the above statement has to also be true. And let's keep going to see if this works out. Then in room 3, my name is Louisa has to be false since we know the guy's name is Aziz. And then I am not in room 1, that is a true statement. So as you can see, with scenario 1 of having the first two statements as true, it works. It's possible, right? So now let's move on to scenario 2 and see if that works. Now, if the top statement of room 1 is true and the bottom statement is false, let's see what that implications is. So he's still Aziz, okay, but he's no longer false. I am not in this room. So if I am not in this room is a false statement, that actually means he is in room 1. Okay, so I'm just going to draw a star. That means that he is in room 1. So let's follow on. In front of room 2, it says, I am not in this room. That has to be a true statement now because we know he's in room 1. And I am in room 3 is a false statement because we know he's in room 1. Then moving on, room 3 says, my name is Louisa. You know that's going to be false since his name is Aziz. And then the second one says, I am not in room 1, which is a false statement since we know he is in room 1. So over here, you can see you have two false statements. So scenario 2 cannot work out. Okay? And now let's consider the last scenario 3. So in scenario 3, we say the first statement of room 1 is false and the second statement of room 1 is true. So that means his name's not Aziz, but he's also not in room 1. So he has to be in either room 2 or room 3. So let's keep on going. In room 2, it says, I am not in this room. Now that could be true or false. We don't have enough information to conclude whether it's in 2 or 3. We just know that he's not in room 1. Yeah. Then if we look at the second statement, I am in room 3. Again, you don't have enough information to really figure it out yet. Okay, so we're just going to leave that blank for now. Let's go to room 3. It says, my name is Louisa. Again, you don't know if that's true or not because the only information we have so far is that his name's not Aziz, right? It could be some other name, right? Other than Louisa or Aziz. But that's not really important. I can say that's either true or false. Then let's look at the second statement. It says, I am not in room 1. You know that is true as well, right? Because we know that this person has to be in either room 2 or 3, right? So it's a true statement to say they're not in room 1. So lastly, if you look at room 2 statements, it could be if it says I am in room 3, that couldn't be possible, so it can be true. And then I am not in this room, that is also going to be true then if he's in room 3. And you can see that scenario 3 can work out. Right? So both scenario 1 here and scenario 3 both end up working out. Now let's see which of the following statements is true according to scenario 1 and 3. My name is Aziz is not guaranteed, right? It's true in scenario 1, but not necessarily true in scenario 3. So A it's not must be true, right? It's only true in scenario 1. I'm in room 1. Now, again, that's not going to be true because in scenario 1, we found out that the person ended up being in room 3. So therefore, he can't always be in room 1. Now, if you look at C, in scenario 1, after looking at these statements, it ended up being true that he was in room 3, right? Since this statement is true. And in scenario 3, this statement was also true, that he was in room 3. So therefore, in both scenario 1 and 3, both conclude that the person is in room 3. So therefore, that must be a true statement. And lastly, it's also not guaranteed whether the person's name is Louisa in scenario 3. So we can't assume that to be true. Okay, so question 36, it's all about having a systematic approach and having a systematic way of organizing the different scenarios. Moving on to question 37, we now have a finding procedures problem solving question, and this one will require a bit of algebra to solve. So let's have a read through it. It says, yesterday in dog park, I saw 8 dog owners exercising their dogs. Some of the dog owners had 1 dog, and some dog owners had 2 dogs. Counting the legs of the dogs and legs of dog owners, there were in total a total of 60 legs. All dogs have 4 legs and all dog owners have 2 legs. How many dog owners had only 1 dog? So, using algebra, we're going to let X be the dog owners with 1 dog. So, if X is the amount of dog owners with 1 dog, and there's in total 8 dog owners, then 8 minus X is the amount of dog owners with 2 dogs. So we know that there's X amount of dog owners with 1 dog. Yes. So remember, each dog has 4 legs. So there will be 4 lots of X here. Plus 8 minus X is the amount of dog owners with 2 dogs. Now, if you have 2 dogs, there's going to be 8 legs in total. So we have to multiply 8 to 8 minus X. And lastly, we can't forget the dog owners themselves who have 2 legs. So remember, there's 8 dog owners. If they each have 2 legs, then that means there's 16 legs to be added on from the humans themselves. And that equals a total of 60. So let's just simplify this. 4x plus 8 distributing into 8 and negative x, it becomes 64 minus 8x plus 16 equals to 60. So now we have 64 plus 60. If we add that together, that becomes 80 minus positive 4x and negative 8x. They can cancel out to become negative 4x, right? Because 4 of the positive x will cancel out with 4 of the negative x's, leaving us with another 4 negative x's. So 80 minus 4x equals to 60. So that means that 4x has to be equivalent to 20, right? And therefore, x has to be equal to 5. And therefore, using algebra, we have now calculated that the amount of dog owners that only had 1 dog is 5. Question 38. There are 2 ways to qualify for the annual Grant County Athletics Championship: by winning at least 3 local events during the year, or by breaking a county record. This year, 10 students from Lisa's school have qualified for the championship. So we know that to qualify for the championship, you need to win at least 3 local events, or you need to break a county record. It's either one or the other, right? Or some particular students, I guess, can do both. So let's have a look at what Lisa has said. I know that a total of 6 county records have been broken by students this year. So that means more than half our qualifiers must be record breakers. Which of the following sentences shows the mistake Lisa has made? Now, before you look at it, just think about it yourself. There is no reason why the person who breaks a county record can't break another one, right? So why does it mean if 6 records are broken, do they all have to be, it doesn't necessarily mean they were broken by 6 different individuals, right? The 6 records broken could have been broken by just 2 people, right? 2 very star athletes who continue to break the records, right? So that is the assumption that Lisa has made. She's assumed that everyone can only break the record once, right? Whereas it can be the scenario where some students can break multiple records, which is exactly what A says. Some of the students from Lisa's school may have broken more than one county record. And if that's the case, then maybe only 2 of the qualifiers were record breakers, right? Only 2 people broke the 6 records, and therefore only 2 of the qualifiers were record breakers. Moving on to question 39. Muhammad's school wanted to find out how different sports affect people's fitness levels. They made all the best sports people take a fitness test. This is what they found. Again, this is a relevant information question. And as always, my tip is to make sure you represent the information in a diagram so you can better answer the question. So we know that fittest runners were fitter than the fittest swimmers. So what I'm going to do is R for runners, I'm going to do a star next to them to show that they're the special ones, they're the fittest ones. And they're fitter, so I'm going to draw an arrow down, than the fittest swimmers. So that's going to be star S for the fittest swimmers. Then we know that all the gymnasts were fitter than most of the runners. And then we know that all the swimmers were fitter than all the gymnasts. Right. So then you have regular swimmers, so just S by themselves, were fitter than all the gymnasts. And then you also know that all the gymnasts were fitter than most of the runners, the average runners. So this is essentially what the fitness level is, like the most fit to least fit. So now that you've represented it in a column, now let's look at which of these following options is the best. If you look at option A, the swimmers' average fitness is better than those of the other groups. That is an assumption. You don't know exactly what the average fitness level is, so you cannot choose A. There's no information about the average fitness level of the swimmer. B says the range of fitness level was greatest amongst the runners. Now that's quite promising because we know that the fittest runners, they're the most fit, whereas the average runners, they're the least fit. So they do have the biggest range in fitness level. And that's why B is the answer, right? And then you can see options C and D are also incorrect, or there's not enough information. Moving on to question 40. Question 40 is an example of spatial reasoning or non-verbal reasoning again. So there are 3 different shapes shown below. Which of the following arrangements cannot be made by putting these 3 shapes together? So essentially, you just want to split up the shapes and see if you can use the 2 trapeziums in the square to create those options. So option A, you can split it into a square and then the 2 trapeziums like so. Option B, there's 1 trapezium here, a square there, and then a trapezium on top. Option C, you can have a trapezium here and a trapezium there, and then the square in the corner. As you can see, D has to be our answer, and it's not possible because you have 1 trapezium here, you have 1 square here, you can't have another trapezium fit there. Well, that brings us to the end of the thinking skills paper. I hope you found the work solutions and explanations beneficial, and I also help you gain some insight into how you approach the different sorts of questions. Thank you very much for listening, and Please stay tuned for the release of our answers for reading comprehension as well as writing, and mathematics has already been released.